this Sunday on Rosemary Barton Live.
What we're asking for today is that same sense of emergency is shared for the forest sector in this country.
Canadian softwood takes another tariff hit from U.S. President Donald Trump. The Premier of British Columbia says the lumber industry isn't getting the same attention as the auto and steel sectors. Are cracks forming in the Team Canada approach to the trade war? We'll ask Premier David Eby as BC forestry companies fight to stay open.
Canada remains firmly committed to NATO. Canada is fully committed to Ukraine.
NATO defense ministers meet as pressure mounts on allies to drum up more military support for Ukraine. And as Canada moves to spend new defense money as quickly as possible, the Minister of National Defense, David McGuinty, is here.
The leadership of the RCMP is frankly just despicable when it comes to enforcing laws against the Liberal government.
The Conservative leader takes aim at the independence of the RCMP, while a former top aide to Stephen Harper says the leader is dismantling the credibility of the party. What does it all mean just 3 months before Poilievre's leadership review? Our Sunday Scrum is here. It all starts now on Rosemary Barton Live. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. The Prime Minister says trade talks with the United States are going in the right direction. And for now, he's holding off on any further retaliatory measures. Mark Carney wants to keep the dialogue going with Washington, choosing not to further escalate the trade conflict. But in another blow to Canada's economy, new U.S. tariffs took effect on lumber last week. British Columbia's Premier is calling for more attention for that province's forestry sector, saying federal support has fallen short. BC Premier David Eby joins me now. Nice to see you, Premier.
Nice to see you too.
You are obviously very concerned about the increase to softwood tariffs that went into effect this past week, and you have said that you don't believe the federal government gets it when it comes to softwood. Do you have the impression that the attention is being paid mostly to central Canada, to Ontario and Quebec and the auto industry, and that the government is not dealing with the softwood tariffs? What is your impression there?
Yeah, I mean, let's take a step back and just so all Canadians understand what we're dealing with here. Russia right now has better access to the U.S. market to sell softwood than Canada does. And I don't think any of us expected to be in that situation. This is one of the country's biggest industries. And I think we all looked on with disappointment and sadness and anger at the Stellantis decision and the impact on auto workers. And that's a big deal in Ontario, and it should be. But it's important for Canadians to know that if you look at the auto parts sector, if you look at the primary steel sector, you put them together, softwood is bigger than both. And it just does not get that resonance. When I hear the federal government talking about what are they dealing with at the table with the Americans, it's steel, it's aluminum, and it's energy. And for some reason, it's just not softwood. And there's an opportunity here for a shared win. It's got to be at the table. We can't send aluminum to the Americans and not say we have to fix the softwood issue too. But
auto is also not on the table right now. The deal that they are trying to seek is on, as you said, steel, aluminum, and energy. I mean, they have to find a way forward on something, and they've started with this. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they're saying softwood won't be resolved. It's just not the first thing that's going to be resolved.
No, and I guess, when we look at $500 million in immediate support for steel plants in Ontario, emergency cabinet meeting about the Stellantis decision, and yet there's 10,000 jobs in British Columbia in the softwood lumber sector. And we're just not seeing that kind of anxiety and energy going into it. And there should be high anxiety and energy. This is a major sector. There are huge knock-on effects across the country, including in Ontario, when softwood's not working. And we need that level of attention, including for the money to flow from the $1.2 billion that the Prime Minister committed to the sector.
Okay, well, that's what I was going to say. They have put that in the window, the $1.2 billion. The industry minister says it will flow soon. What have you been told about why it hasn't and where it's at?
Well, we celebrated the announcement, and I think that at the time, a real reflection of a shift that I think is happening. Actually, I don't want to be entirely critical under the Carney administration. I think they are looking west more often. But it's so easy to drift back into focus on central Canada. And so we have to stay on top of it. And that's what I'm doing. I'm pushing hard for British Columbians, but also all Canadians that are working in the softwood sector to make sure that we are on the agenda. And we're going to have to keep pushing on that. The explanation is just that they're working through how best to distribute the money. And it needs to happen now. These companies are on a knife's edge. Shifts are already being curtailed. People are already losing employment, and the work needs to be deployed now.
So you haven't been told when that money will start flowing?
We're told soon, and it needs to be soon, but we're still working with the federal government on it.
You know, it is obviously your job as Premier to fight for your industry and your workers. I wonder, though, whether you are concerned with presenting sort of a divided front right now at a time when there are negotiations happening, not on the sector that you're talking about, but there are negotiations happening. And it does seem as though the divisions across the country could be creating problems at the negotiating table, whether it's with the United States or with China, as they try and deal with that as well.
You know, we're going to have to find that balance. I think that it's crucial that all premiers are on Team Canada. We're all pushing in the same direction. We're going to have disagreements about emphasis and tactics, and that's normal. But I've got to say, here in British Columbians are showing up for this fight. We are second in Canada for reducing our cross-border traffic. Second only to PEI. I don't know what that's about, but we're right behind PEI, and we're here for the fight because we understand what's on the line, which is our country's sovereignty. And we can have disagreements with other premiers about tactics and approach without losing track of the big project, which is ensuring this country can stand on its own 2 feet and growing our economy and diversifying markets.
So what other levers do you have then? Certainly speaking out, but in terms of a retaliation that British Columbia could take itself, is there anything else that you're considering?
Well, you know, we're following the lead of the federal government on this, and supportive of that kind of united approach. We think that striking out on our own is not going to be the path forward, but we're maintaining the restrictions that we put in place. We're not putting American booze back on the shelves. We are deprioritizing and removing American companies from public procurement, focusing on Canadian companies and other reliable trading partners. And we're going to continue that until there's resolution of this issue with the Americans at the table. If there are other steps taken, there are other steps we can take in British Columbia. And we're happy to support the federal government because really they need us. They need what we produce. They need our lumber around cost-effective building material. Yeah. They need our germanium from the Teck smelter and Trail. And so let's talk about those things at the table.
I do want to ask you about the Alberta pipeline push, because that continues. As you know, the Premier of Alberta wants to see something green-lit before the Grey Cup is the deadline she's given. The decision obviously comes from the Major Projects Unit and from the federal government. The Energy Minister said in a Senate hearing last week that the Alberta government needs to get the support of British Columbia and, of course, Indigenous communities in your province. Is that what has to happen here? Or have you spoken to the Alberta Premier about this project and what she's trying to do?
I have. I had a call from the Alberta Premier briefly before she announced her communications task force. I guess I'm just deeply disappointed. I had thought we were on a certain path with Alberta. There's lots of work we can do together, including about access to tidewater for Alberta petroleum products. We have a publicly owned pipeline. There's a significant optimization project that could significantly expand throughput. We're not talking about that. Electrical intertie that could reduce emissions and reduce bills for Albertans. We're not talking about that. Expanding the hydrogen sector. We're not talking about that. Instead, what we're talking about is a non-existent project. There is no proponent. There is no route. There is nothing. But the Premier is launching a full attack on our social license with First Nations along the coast for tens of billions of dollars in real projects with proponents, environmental assessments that are complete or near complete, reaching final investment decision. The tanker ban to protect Canada's west coast, our pristine north coast, is the social license with First Nations to be able to deliver tens of billions of dollars in economic growth to the country in real projects. And so the fact that she's launching this culture war, an ideological war, and an entirely taxpayer-funded communication strategy that has no project behind it, that will require tens of billions of dollars in taxpayer money to construct because no company wants to do it. That's patently obvious. Is deeply frustrating to me and totally counterproductive to where we need to be going.
I mean, you sound pretty angry, Premier, frankly.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, like, when you spend years, and we have spent years, working with First Nations, working with communities around major energy projects, low carbon projects, LNG projects, expanding the Port of Prince Rupert, bringing everyone together, trying to build a durable consensus about resource development in the Northwest, which is fragile. And then to have the Premier of Alberta roll out of bed and say, you know what, I think it would be cool to have a pipeline. I don't actually have any project, but I think that would be great. And BC needs to remove this tanker ban. That's a foundational piece to these major projects that are worth billions to the Canadian economy. Like, just advance your work. Show me a company that wants to build this thing, that will sign on, that will be involved, because it doesn't exist. And if you can't do that, then be frank. Say, this is going to be a project that's going to cost taxpayers $40 billion. And here's why we think that should happen, instead of using the tens of billions of dollars that we were already spent on the publicly owned pipeline that already exists. You know, and here's how that compares with other projects across the country that could be done at similar expense or significantly cheaper. You know, let's have a frank conversation about it instead of pretending that there's some kind of block of a project that doesn't actually exist, because we have real projects we're trying to get done here.
Okay, Premier, we'll leave it there. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
The union representing forest industry workers says there's a growing crisis in the sector. It's decades long before the tariff threats by the Trump administration. According to Statistics Canada, over 30,000 forestry jobs have been lost since the turn of the century. Forestry, one of BC's biggest industries, has been hit hard with layoffs as mills close right across the province. More than 10,000 forest sector jobs have been lost in that province since 2001. Andy Riley is the owner of Riley Lumber and board chair of the Independent Wood Processors Association of British Columbia, and he joins me now. Nice to see you this morning.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So softwood has been, I don't have to tell you, an irritant or a problem for the U.S. for a long time, and your company has been around for decades as well. What do you make of this latest attack by the Trump administration?
I started Riley Lumber in 1995, and this is quite a bit different, Rosemary, because previously in 2006, we had WTO rulings and NAFTA rulings that were quite binding and that gave us a lot of leverage to negotiate with the Americans. And virtually the dispute was kind of getting legislated to an end by the WTO and by NAFTA. This time, however, we don't have any WTO leverage. The World Trade Organization is pretty toothless in terms of trade disputes these days. As you know, CUSMA and NAFTA is kind of maybe getting renegotiated. So the peril that we see is that if we don't try to get some kind of a managed trade deal, we're going to lose a significant portion of our value-added sector, not just in British Columbia, but across the country. And that's what we're worried about. We've been involved in the value-added sector, like I said, for 30 years now. And we've seen it reduced quite a bit over that time, but sure. I'm thinking of our 60 member companies. We might lose 15 to 20 if this goes into Q1 of 2026.
What does it mean for your company in particular? I mean, that sounds like a devastating impact on the industry, but for your mill's ability to stay operating.
We manufacture Western Red Cedar, which is the premium species from British Columbia, which also means it's the most expensive. Sure. So we're in a situation where our products are expensive to the point that people are substituting prior to the 35% going in. Now we're at 45%, and I will be honest with you that we are now selling products at the margin. We're not making any profit on it. In some cases, we're losing money on what we're selling now. Just to put things into perspective for your viewers, a company like ours, we paid $48,000 US funds duty last week. So that was the 1 week bill for our small company. Wow. And we are concerned that our customers are going to be priced out of the market. And I just want to highlight that our customers in the States, they don't like this situation any more than we do. Many of our customers have based their business plan on buying British Columbia cedar and selling it throughout the market.
Yeah.
And they're getting hit with this as bad as anybody. We're not in a situation. Most small, medium-sized companies in Canada are not in a situation where we can, ingest 45%. So our workforce has gone from 30 to 18, and it might be going down from there at our mill in Chilliwack.
I mean, those numbers give a really good sense of things, Andy, in terms of what you're trying to deal with. I talked to the Premier of British Columbia, and I'm sure you've heard him this past week. He does feel as though softwood issue is being overshadowed by other industries, steel, auto. Do you feel that as well? Do you think that you're getting enough attention by the government that this is being taken seriously?
Well, I was recently in Ottawa at a meeting with Minister LeBlanc and Minister Hodgson, and they called together a group of the primary and the secondary manufacturers from across Canada. And they made a pretty good pitch saying that they considered softwood lumber is as important as steel, auto parts, and aluminum. So we left that meeting, this is back in July, about the 15th or so. We left that meeting thinking that, okay, well, that sounds pretty encouraging. I think I can speak for the entire industry, particularly the value-added industry, when I say that after the meeting a week ago in Washington with our Prime Minister and President Trump, there was a press conference from the rooftop of our embassy, and Minister LeBlanc basically got up and said that we're looking at the three key sectors: steel, aluminum, and energy. So we were all quite disappointed that softwood wasn't in that triumvirate as they had said it would be. There's a lot of jobs that are involved, and I think Premier Eby is correct. It for softwood in British Columbia, it is as important to our economy as steel, aluminum in Quebec, steel and auto parts in Ontario. So it's a very serious situation because, Rosie, if we lose small, medium-sized companies, either the owners retire or they're not profitable anymore and they close, those companies aren't going to magically come back. Like anybody that's left in our sector right now is pretty well financed, has been through a pandemic, we've been through strikes, we've been through housing crisis, so everybody's pretty war weathered. So when they go away, they're not magically going to all come back, and that's what I'm truly concerned about because not only primary sawmilling in British Columbia, but the value-added sector is pretty important to the future of the forest business in British Columbia.
Andy, I'm going to leave it there, but let's stay in touch. I'd like to see how things go, how your company gets through this, and if there's some relief. Thank you so much for making some time for us.
We'll keep fighting. Thank you.
Canada among the countries looking to bolster support for Ukraine as Russia continues its campaign of provocation against NATO.
This is not a war that started on President Trump's watch, but it will end on his watch. So let us seize this moment, strongly forge peace in Ukraine, and let's bring peace through strength.
NATO defense ministers met this past week. Defense Minister David McGuinty was there. He joins me next as Canada gets set to quadruple spending on defense. Stick around.
in the end, what we need to achieve is to make sure that Putin gets to the table, that meaningful negotiations start, and that we bring this terrible war to an end. And that end has to be lasting. That is why the Europeans have come together to discuss security guarantees, together with Canada and others.
NATO defense ministers met this past week in Brussels, where allies pledged billions in funding and equipment for Ukraine. This comes as Kyiv says it needs $120 billion next year in order to stave off Russia's war. And David McGuinty is the Minister of National Defense, and he joins me in studio. Nice to see you, Minister.
Nice to see you, Rosie.
Appreciate you making the time, because you're just back from Brussels, where you had a NATO defense ministers meeting. And I know that there was a lot of conversation around the war in Ukraine. And I wonder what your Ukrainian counterpart wanted to get from you and from other allies to help them get to the end of this.
Well, I think the first thing they wanted to assess and correctly assess was the continuing resolve amongst all the partners. We got an update in terms of the severity of the continuing invasion and war. We got an update in terms of the expanded use of drones. We got an update in terms of the up to 19,000 children who've been abducted by Russian army and other authorities in Russia. So we really came together, and Canada stipulated again very publicly how committed we are to the alliance.
Canada, though, promised more than 24 refurbished light armored vehicles to Ukraine. That was over 2 years ago. None have been delivered, is my understanding. What is the holdup there, and how does our resolve translate into delivering on some of these promises? We've
actually delivered quite a few LAVs, light armored vehicles, 20 thus far, out of 40 or 50 that are due by the end of this year. That continues. There are different manufacturers we work with, so we're making progress. We've announced a lot of aid, not the least of which was a $500 million purchase of Ukrainian identified equipment from the United States, as other NATO partners did as well.
How many LAVs have been delivered then, just to be clear?
My understanding is 20. And there are more being delivered this fall.
Okay. There was also a conversation around using frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. Is it to fund the war at this stage or to rebuild? How can Canada contribute to that piece?
There was a series of discussions about the expanded use of economic measures and trade measures and pressures to be brought on Russia, including, for example, what we can do to stop the use of a shadow fleet of vessels that they're using to distribute oil to different parts of the world. How can we arrest this? How can we stop it? What can we do? Can we use insurance systems, banking systems? Can we use regulatory systems? And the NATO as a whole is coming together to see what the options are on that front.
But in terms of the things that Canada has seized from Russian assets, is the idea to unfreeze those but deliver them directly to Ukraine?
It's a bit more complicated than meets the eye. We can't easily do this. But this is an ongoing discussion inside NATO. What can we do collectively? And we need the United States with us on this journey because they have such obviously a predominant role in terms of the global banking system.
Okay, a couple more domestic issues. The F-35 fighter jet review. It was supposed to be done. It's not done. What is the holdup? What is the status of the review?
I can say this. It's under review, and the government's going to take the time it needs to get this right. We can only control what we can control. There are a lot of factors at play. We're going to take the time. The Prime Minister wants to take the time to give it the proper, considered opinion. Consideration, forgive me.
But what is being reviewed? Is it the continuation of the purchase of the F-35s, or is it, as your colleague Melanie Joly has suggested, trying to get more from Lockheed Martin in terms of investment in industrial
There's no surprise. Look, there's no surprise that obviously we want to achieve the most industrial benefits we can for the country. We're doing the same thing with submarines. I have the German and Norwegian ministers of defense coming to see us this week. The South Korean president sent a special emissary to see us some time ago to talk about South Korean submarines. So these continuing conversations are important because we're giving rise to a whole expanded defense industrial base in the country.
Is a mixed fleet on the table still?
That's part of the review, and we'll see what the review actually delivers up. But right now we're looking at the refurbishment not just of our fighter jets and our submarines, but Rose, you can imagine, we're talking about basics and fundamentals here on 33 bases, and infrastructure and water systems and housing and kit and Wi-Fi systems. All of this is underway right now. All these investments are being made at breakneck speed.
As I'm sure you know this, that the U.S. ambassador has said that the F-35 review and whether or not it goes ahead would be an irritant in the broader conversations with Donald Trump. Has Pete Hegseth ever brought that up with you?
I met with him 2 weeks ago. We spent a lot of time talking about a number of elements of areas where we are cooperating and making progress, not the least of which is under integrated air and missile defense systems. So the question of irritants is, I think it's maybe a bit of a misnomer. We're moving forward. We have an integrated defense system. We're active members of NORAD. It's the only binational command in the world. It's an extraordinary system that works for us. We need to keep investing in it.
Okay, so I guess that would bring me then to what you probably also discussed was the Golden Shield with Pete Hegseth. Are the F-35s a factor in that? Does it make more sense for all that kind of interoperability if we are going to participate in this?
A Continental Shield discussion is underway right now with the United States. The Prime Minister lifted that restriction, that freeze, some months ago, one that was in place for a long time. We are investing heavily in over-the-horizon radar systems. The Americans are doing the same. We'll know we have a certain amount of time if we know something's coming at us. Remember that if there is a missile strike of some kind heading towards the United States, it's likely going to come over the Canadian Arctic or the American Arctic in terms of Alaska. So how we respond to this, how we invest to be able to respond is exactly what we're negotiating and talking about.
So we haven't signed anything when it comes to the Golden Dome. We are still considering signing onto a
the
program?
question of a Continental Shield is one that we're talking about. It is something that builds on our existing NORAD interoperable system, as you rightly point out. If there's a problem and we're scrambling jets on our side of the border or their side of the border, we do it collectively. There is a joint command.
But just to go back to the F-35s and how the Golden Dome, and I notice you're not calling it that, but that's what the president calls it, is the Golden Dome and our participation in that contingent on having F-35s and more than we have ordered right now?
The first thing for Canadians to remember is we're not sure what the Golden Dome means.
Okay.
I know what continental security means for us. We have a domestic, a continental, and an international responsibility. And we have to look at this strategically and coherently. That's why I was down at NORAD in Colorado some time ago. The general who heads it up is coming to see us again. This question of continental response capacity is one that's very much in play in terms of our discussions.
It's not something we could be left out of. Would that be fair to say?
Very difficult to contemplate the notion that Canada's not going to have a continental partnership with the United States in terms of our overall security position, whether that's maritime or land-based or air-based. And that's what integrated air and missile defense systems are all about, integrating with our neighbor. In fact, in NATO at Brussels, there was a very similar conversation about how we would integrate air and missile defense systems in the context of the Russian invasion.
Does it make you uncomfortable or nervous at all to be considering further security integration with the United States, given some of the other factors at play right now?
We are integrated with the United States right now. NORAD is a binational command that's been in existence for decades. We've been working and investing conjointly in this for a long time. The command is shared. The level of cooperation between the Canada and the United States on intelligence, security, and defense remains unshaken, and in my view, as it should. We need to make sure that we are managing the relationship well with the United States. I think the Prime Minister is showing that that can happen. The negotiations that are going on in Washington right now are negotiations. But meanwhile, we continue to cooperate. We continue to make sure that the North American continent is properly defended.
A last question on spending, because we are finally going to meet this 2% NATO target, which I know is going to be hard to do, frankly, to do it quickly enough in order to meet the deadline, I think, of next spring. Is it possible? Because we are talking about big acquisitions, a lot of procurement in a very short period of time. How are you able to do that fast enough?
Answer, yes. Our view is we will be able to make the investments we've committed to making by March 31st, which is 2% of our GDP, 5 years ahead of schedule. This involves, don't forget as well, major pay and remuneration package updates for all members of the Canadian Armed Forces. That's a big chunk of this. Here's something else we did, Rosie, which we think will have a dramatic effect on the ability to actually make these purchases. We have given more autonomy and more authority to local folks on bases, commanders and folks like this, who are perfectly capable of making these acquisitions. Now we're asking folks to be able to make those decisions and not run it up 14 levels of approval. And this is starting to really kick in.
Okay. Minister, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre has called the leadership of the RCMP, quote, despicable for deciding not to charge former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the SNC-Lavalin affair and for accepting an invitation to take a family vacation on the Aga Khan's private island.
These would normally have led to criminal charges, but of course the RCMP covered it all up, and the leadership of the RCMP is frankly just despicable when it comes to enforcing laws against the Liberal government.
The RCMP Commissioner, Mike Duhem, soundly rejects those claims from the Conservative leader, saying the police force doesn't take orders from anyone. And there's been strong pushback to the claims from within Poilievre's own party. The Sunday Scrum, thankfully, is standing by. They're next.
Trudeau broke the criminal code when he took a free vacation from someone with whom he had government business. It's just like it's right there in the criminal code. If the RCMP had been doing its job and not covering up for him, then he would have been criminally charged.
I don't take any orders from any political individual. And as far as his comment with regards to senior management, I would invite Mr. Poilievre to meet with us and to meet with the people who run this great organization, 32,000 strong.
Pierre Poilievre, in a podcast appearance there, claiming that the RCMP shielded former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau from criminal charges. Poilievre provided no evidence to support those claims. Claims, as you heard, that the RCMP says are false. And then on Friday, a former top aide to Stephen Harper, Dimitri Soudis, wrote a piece for the Toronto Star saying Poilievre is, quote, dismantling the Conservative Party. Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Aaron Wary, a senior writer for the CBC, and Tonda McCharles, the Ottawa bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Gary Mason, columnist for the Globe and Mail. He's in Vancouver. Tonda, I'll start with you. I mean, it was one thing for Pierre Poilievre to make those claims, and I should point out that he was referring to past leadership, not the current commissioner. But it was another thing then for Dimitri Soudis, who is still a player in the Conservative environment, to go after him in that op-ed in your paper.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there are a few things going on there.
Yeah.
Leaving aside the fact that Mr. Poilievre's office had to later clarify that he was going after past leadership of the RCMP. He's also still quite fixated on Justin Trudeau as the Liberal leader. Look, I guess two things I want to point out before I get to the political thing of what Dimitri Soudis wrote. The idea that the RCMP is politicized comes up on both sides of the aisle when it suits them, frankly. I mean, the RCMP continues to investigate a number of federal contracting issues under under the Liberal government. When the 2005-06 campaign was going on, the Liberals were the ones who felt that they were, affected negatively by an RCMP decision to acknowledge an investigation into an income trust tax change at the time. Look, there's always allegations about politicization of the RCMP, and I think, though, that in the 30 years that I was covering the RCMP in this town, I'm often struck that whenever politics intersects with investigations, if anything, the RCMP is often naive about the fallout or oblivious to the political fallout. But those accusations are very common, very familiar. Now, what it does, though, do is, having given sort of a platform for a senior Conservative, a former spokesperson for a former Prime Minister, to say Mr. Poilievre is all about grievance and not governance, that was really interesting to me. And that opens a whole other question about the politics going on here.
Yeah, we should say that Stephen Harper's spokesperson made it very clear that he did not support the comments by Dimitri Soudis. These are just his views, personal views. Gary, what did you make of either of the pieces of this story?
Well, I was struck by many of the same things Tonda's referred to. I mean, Soudis said that, the party that Stephen Harper sort of built and launched into government was based on substance, integrity, and maturity. And that's never really seemed to be the party that Pierre Poilievre has wanted to build since taking over as leader of the federal Conservatives. He does seem more comfortable, leading a grievance movement than a mature and respected political institution. Maybe he just feels that this is grounds that he's more comfortable around, but he sure sounds more comfortable, talking like Donald Trump in many of these, in many of these same references that you hear Trump make. But one thing that's kind of interesting is that there's a new Abacus poll that has come out, and it shows the two parties, relatively neck and neck, tied. But whenever Trump is front and center in the political conversation, the Liberal vote share among people 60 and older goes up. And right now, that vote, they have about an 11-point lead among Canadians 60 and older who are just simply turned off by Donald Trump or anything to do with Donald Trump. So it's kind of an interesting strategy for the Conservative leader to want to be linked to Trump when there's so much negativity around his name in Canada at the moment.
Aaron?
Yeah, just to go back to the comments themselves, I don't think that, the suggestion after the fact that this was specific or something specific to the previous RCMP commissioner changes much about the substance of what he said. To suggest that there was a politically motivated cover-up and to do so without evidence is an incredibly serious charge and a potentially dangerous charge for the institution and for faith in the Canadian justice system. And so I think there's an incredible onus now on Mr. Poilievre to explain on what basis he was making these comments and on what evidence he was making these comments. I do think, one of the storylines in the last election was this idea of whether or not Pierre Poilievre was too much like Donald Trump. And, Conservatives may balk at that idea, but I think, if these comments remind people of Donald Trump, I think that's Mr. Poilievre's own fault. As for what goes on next in terms of the Conservative Party, I do think it is interesting. The question that Mr. Soudis kind of raises is whether, Pierre Poilievre has sort of pushed things too far for Conservatives now, whether they still kind of want to support this kind of politics. And I think that is an interesting question, for MPs and for sort of Conservatives, established Conservatives who have served in previous governments. Is this the kind of politics they want to pursue?
As he faces a leadership review in January. Yeah, Tonda.
I was struck, that comment by Mr. Poilievre came at the 28-minute mark into about a 32-minute interview with interviewers he was clearly ideologically comfortable with. And he sort of went off on that tangent about the RCMP and covering up. I wonder, if we ask ourselves what's really going on here and why is it happening now, To a certain extent, those comments will appeal to a certain part of Poilievre's base, to everybody's comments here, that there is some portion of the conservative voting coalition that does like Trump. But there is definitely an impact also on the effort to broaden the coalition. And I guess, you know, I kind of see Mr. Poilievre as too skilled a performer, a political performer, to have just casually tossed that off. I think that he is pretty deliberate in most of what he says. And I think he's made a calculation that to get through his leadership review in January and to stop sort of, you know, any agitation about his leadership, he's going to prove to them that he remains the person that they thought could lead the party into the last election, and many of them still believe can win them a next vote. You know, that's the bigger question. I do see a lot of this throwing red meat to the base sort of argument as supporting the fact that he's determined to win first the leadership review in January.
Okay, Aaron Wary, Tana McCharles, Gary Mason, thanks for spending part of your Sunday with me. Talk soon.
Thanks.
Israel has launched new airstrikes in southern Gaza, accusing Hamas of violating the terms of the U.S. brokered ceasefire. Just how volatile is the agreement and the future of the ongoing peace talks? That's next. You're watching Rosemary Barton Live. Israel launched new airstrikes today in Gaza following accusations that Hamas has violated the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Staff at this hospital in Gaza say at least 5 Palestinians have been killed, about 30 more injured from those Israeli strikes. The strikes follow a U.S. State Department statement yesterday indicating they had received reports of an expected imminent ceasefire violation from Hamas, though provided no further details. Hamas has denied the claims and says it's committed to the agreement and accused Israel of multiple ceasefire violations in recent days. Dennis Ross was a director at the State Department in the George H.W. Bush administration. He also served as special Middle East coordinator under President Bill Clinton. He's now a distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute, a pro-Israel think tank, and we spoke on Friday. Ambassador Ross, thank you so much for making the time for us.
Good to be with you.
We've obviously seen things happening on both sides since Sunday from Israel and Hamas. Allegations that the other side has violated the ceasefire agreement already. How concerned are you about the fragility of this agreement and where we are?
Well, the agreement is based on two phases. If you look at the Trump plan of 20 points, phase one was the hostage release, the prisoner release, the resumption of humanitarian assistance. And the hostage release was the live hostages as well as all the bodies of the remaining hostages. Now, Hamas had 28 bodies, and it has furnished 9 of the 28. It claims that it doesn't have easy access to others who are buried under rubble, and it can't do more than it is now. The White House has suggested they think this is not an excuse. The Israelis tend to believe it is an excuse, that there's at least another 10 that should be accessible. And clearly the Israelis believe that Hamas is playing a game here, trying to use the dead hostages as a chip, probably, in continuing negotiations. At this point, my own feeling is this is a reminder that every issue is one where there's likely to be a different interpretation.
What do you think will be maybe the biggest sticking point, but a big sticking point moving forward?
There's a nexus here, or a linkage between disarmament and Israeli withdrawal. No disarmament, no Israeli withdrawal. If that takes place, we will see a resumption of the war, not an end to the war. Now, President Trump has an enormous stake in making this work because he made it very clear the war has ended. Now, I don't think anybody is really looking to resume the war. I also think that you have in Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt an enormous stake in making this work for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is proving themselves President Trump. Each of them wants something from President Trump. Each of them wants to demonstrate that he has a real stake in relations with them because they can offer things that are important to him. So I think there is a kind of context that is taking place and that is different than before and gives you some reason to believe that implementation will take place. But I think what we're already seeing on an issue like the dead bodies is nothing will come easily, and it will require very intensive work. And we're not even talking about, all right, who makes up the stabilization force? What are the rules of engagement of the stabilization force? What really is its mission? All these things, in addition to the Board of Peace and its actual role, and that the government or the technicians committee of Palestinians not affiliated with any political movement, all these things have to be worked out. None of them have been.
How vital is the idea that the president stay engaged and that those other Arab nations stay engaged and keep a certain amount of pressure on the parties to be working towards those things?
If you don't have the continuing pressure and the continuing engagement, this will fall apart. It's not more complicated than that. When I say that on each point, and especially the hardest ones like disarmament and withdrawal, there are no common understandings of what that means. When I say that, let me give you an example. What's the end point of disarmament? Does that mean every Hamas doesn't have a gun? If that's the case, you'll never achieve it. So there has to be a measure that is meaningful, meaning that Hamas is no longer capable of posing threats. And in a sense, its major weapon systems and the bulk of its arms, in fact, have been turned over and been decommissioned. And by the way, that's necessary not just for Israeli withdrawal. You will not get reconstruction without it. The real formula is demilitarization for reconstruction. The Saudis and the Emiratis will not invest in Gaza if Hamas retains its weapons and can reconstitute itself. They will simply not, because from their standpoint, that means Hamas over time will have a chance and will seek to do this again. So demilitarization is an issue in which there's enormous convergence between the Israelis and many of the Arab states.
As you know, the president is now, I'm not saying he's moving on from this, but he's also turning his attention back to Russia and Ukraine, suggesting that, okay, he's achieved peace quote unquote, in the Middle East, and he can do that when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. What is your assessment of how difficult and different the situation is here between Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East?
The profound difference is that Trump had leverage on the Israelis. Bibi Netanyahu cannot say no to him. But he also had leverage on the key Arab players as well.
Right.
In this situation, he has leverage only on one side, at least in terms of what he's been prepared to exercise. He's not been prepared to exercise leverage on Putin. It doesn't mean he doesn't have it. I mean, when he talks about tomahawks, that's real leverage. When you look at $300 billion in frozen assets, that's real leverage, especially if you say, okay, if you don't settle, we're going to favor those being used for Ukrainian reconstruction. So he has the leverage, which is a parallel, but in the case of Russia so far, he's not been prepared to use it.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, I really appreciate your expertise and for joining us today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
House of Commons resumes this coming week, and we'll expect to see that bail reform legislation at some point during the week. Thank you so much for spending part of your Sunday with us. We appreciate it. See you again back here next Sunday, if not before. Take good care.